grandma down. This is Uncle John. Uncle John was such a fun guy. He was so funny. But I had just learned, I think I had my learner's license, and my mother and I had bought this Volkswagen, and we were going out to the mountains. West of High River, we lived in High River at the time. They came up from probably Burdett. And so Uncle John was beside me. I'm driving because I had to have somebody with a license. I think we were in a Volkswagen, but I think he had Clifford sitting on his knee. Glenn and Carolyn and some others were in the back. I'm driving down this gravel road, and all of a sudden they're laughing in the back, and Glenn was pouring something into it. We had some Cokes and bottles, and he was pouring something into my Coke. And I just turned right around, forgot I was driving, and I checked Glenn in the back seat, see what he was doing. And there's Uncle John, oh! And he's grabbing the steering wheel, keep me on the road. I had such fun with my uncles and aunts. Back to the farm. I've told this story before, but I'm going to tell it again maybe for some of the younger ones. But my dad and mom made a very quick trip down to Little Rock, Arkansas to pick up a school bus that my dad was buying to run the school bus route. So we stayed at Grandma and Grandpa's. And Glenn and I were sleeping in Uncle Dave's room upstairs in the house there. And I look up on the shelf, and there's a box that says, "O. Henry chocolate bar."
Oh yeah, this.
If you read my book, you know the story. My kids have read it. So I took one of those chocolate bars. And we went out, Glenn and I went out, and we went back, and we were way back behind the shop that Grandpa had there. And I threw it on the ground, and then I to Glenn, look at what's this? and so I picked it up, and Glenn looks at it, and I just wanted him to rip it open, and we're going to eat it. Oh, he had to take it to Grandma. Well, he took it to Grandma, and Grandma, she was so concerned. She says, "If it's been laying out behind the shop, you can't eat that. So she carefully opened it up, and it looked okay. So she chopped it up into little pieces and gave one to Glenn, one to me, one to Darla, one to Sharon. And I got this little deal, and I felt so guilty. Terribly, terribly guilty. I'd stolen, I'd lied. And so a couple days later, we were leaving, and everybody was around there and everything. And Glenn says to Uncle Dave, "Uncle Dave, what are those chocolate bars doing up in your room?" Uncle Dave, "Oh, really?" He runs up there, he brings the whole box down, he hands us all the chocolate bars, and we just asked him if we would have had it. Instead of going through this terrible, terrible guilt and having to confess to my sins. Those are some of the strange memories from down on the farm. Come, Gloria, and tell us a little bit about going out and playing out in the playhouse there, or Darla, you can too.
Remember.
Come ahead. Come, Darla. Tell us some of your memories.
Okay.
No, yeah, you come up here because you got to talk into the mic. Tell us a story, one that you remember. I mean, you're not that much younger than me, and you got to remember some of those stories.
The white picket fence there, just behind it was Grandma's garden, and before you actually got to the vegetable stuff, there was lots and lots of flowers, that's what I remember a lot.
Yeah.
She just loved those flowers. And then, of course, we would always go and play in there and run around and make mud pies.
Yeah.
And pretend we were having picnics and I don't know, stuff like that.
Carolyn, this Darla, come ahead. Just come here. Tell them more about it.
Well, the thing about that was that there were lots of choke cherries on those bushes that Grandma had. Remember the choke cherries? And choke cherries aren't particularly good, but that's all you got. That's all we had was choke cherries. And anyhow, now I did have some more stories, but don't know where they went. anyway, yeah, so Grandma knew that, that we were playing there. Oh, I know the rest of the story. And the rest of the story is that the Fredericks from town used to come and play with Sharon and I, and we thought that was pretty special. But you know, they did not like to have Doug, and they just got really concerned if Doug was going to come and play with us. Because we were used to Doug because, you know, we had one brother and he got in our way all the time. So we were used to it, but these girls from town, they didn't like Doug. That's about all I know about that.
Oh, yeah. One of them married one of my wife's best friends. Many years later. Many years later. Anybody else got a story? Or yeah, kind of talk. Uncle Phil, come and I want to ask you a couple questions. Come, I'm just gonna.
Can't answer them from here.
No, you gotta talk in the microphone.
How long is the cable? We can move the cable back.
I don't think I got that much cable. Oh,
Yeah,
we're here.
Sit down to front, maybe.
I was looking at these pictures and the one of Uncle Dave riding the little scooter across there, and in the background I said there's some buildings down there. Tell us about those. There's just they're not barns, but there's children. I remember that.
There's a granary there. That granary was our oat bin, and it had a grinder in it that you powered with a belt from a tractor. I don't think that's what you wanted me to tell.
No,
but
that's good. Tell me.
very dusty job. And you ground up oats to feed the cows and the horses. But beside it, just parked to the right of it, is what was a cook car from a thrashing outfit that my dad had. But in the 30s, 1934 to be exact, there was no crop in that area. And so Dad, like several other farmers in the area, moved their cattle north. And that cook car was on steel wheels at that time and hooked to 4 horses, and they pulled it from Northgate to Rama, which I think is about 100 miles, maybe more, up number 9 highway, and my brothers drove all the cattle, and it took a while. I was a year old, and when we left Northgate, I knew how to walk. When we got to Rama, I couldn't walk, had to learn it over again. And I'm not sure how that cook car got brought back home. I never ever asked that, but that's the story of it. And our family all lived in that cook car. That was a camping trip, kind of a stressful one, I think. A couple of things that happened on that trip that I don't remember, even though I was there, but I've been told that we were crossing a bridge, a narrow bridge, and one of the wheels broke, steel wheels are broke, and so they had to lift it up and take the wheel to town and get it fixed, and people that wanted to cross the bridge became pretty irate about the fact that we broke down the middle of the bridge. Another situation was that our cows hadn't had food probably all summer, not much, and so they weren't giving milk. I needed milk, and so they were going by a place, cows out in the pasture. My mother went out and milked one of those cows, got me some supper. I don't know anymore. When we got up there, I'm told that I could tell probably a story on Doug's dad, if I could
Yeah.
remember how it all goes. But anyway, up there they had crop, and so my dad put up poles, and they put straw on it and made a barn for the cattle. And one day, the horses, actually, in the spring, my dad went back to the farm in Northgate and put in the crop with a tractor. For those of you who are mechanically inclined, the tractor was badly needed repairs and was using a lot of oil. And so he would actually, when it started to miss cylinders firing, he would stop, take the spark plugs out, pump the oil out of the cylinders, crank it up, and go again until it stopped again. But I was like, when Dad was back on the farm, then Ernie, the oldest in the family, kind of took charge.
He was about 16, wasn't he?
Yeah, I would guess.
Yeah.
And much to my mother's concern, because he kind of liked to do things his own way. And couldn't be persuaded. One day all the horses disappeared. And he was determined to go and look for the horses, and Mom wouldn't let him go initially. And finally he just took off and went to look for the horses. What do you think the horses were doing? They were going home. Way down the road. And he found them and brought them back. And those cows that walked up to Rama, and they didn't have to walk back to the farm. The government provided a rail car, kind of a relief thing, and brought all the cattle home. The cows had been gone a year, and they came and brought them to the barn, and they all walked into their stalls.
Wow.
Well, maybe a cow does have a little sense.
If I'm not mistaken, there was about 200 cattle, wasn't there?
I don't think so.
Not quite that many. I thought that's
About
about
100.
100. Okay, it was more than I thought when I originally heard the story. And Ruth has written that down if you haven't got a copy of some of that story. I don't know about the dad getting upset, but that's in some letters that I have that she was writing, that she wrote, Grandma wrote, I think, back to Grandpa about Ernie taking off on her. It's interesting. Darla's going to come and read a letter. And then some of you have read it.
I'll ask a
I
question.
did,
of-
yeah. Oh,
of
Carolyn, you
Phil.
come up and tell.
Well, once again, I was too little to participate.
To get in trouble.
To play anti-eye over with the ball going over the barn, big barn. And
They threw the ball over the barn? That must have been a granary.
no, it was, this is the question, I'm not sure but my memory is that the ball went up and it hit the top of the barn, and we all thought it would turn around. They were getting, the ones that had to go around the barn and chase and everything, they were starting to run, and then the ball just kept going right over the roof and went down the other side. Now, that's whatever 4 or 5 year old that I was, if that was, I'm asking, do you remember that? Anybody there?
We played Sandy over the house and the barn.
Okay. How many of you know what anti-eye over is? How many of you played it? Oh, young people, you don't know about anti-eye over? What you did was,
Our houses aren't too tall.
what's that?
Our houses aren't the
Our
right
houses
size.
are too tall.
There's not enough room to run
Tell
around.
us, Uncle Phil, what anti-eye over was for you guys.
Well, you simply stood on one side of the building, and by the way, that was a 2-story house, so.
Maybe we're just getting, our arms are too weak now.
And you hollered, Andy, I over, and you threw the ball you hollered to let them know it was coming, and they should catch it.
And
then?
if they caught it, they could run around and throw it at you and put you out. You didn't play that way? Oh, Darla, you guys played anti over at school instead of studying for years. But how did you do that? I mean, tell me what you remember.
Well, I don't know, we just, they didn't get it over.
So you threw the ball
Sharon's
over.
got something.
Sharon, you tell me about anti over.
Yeah, well, some of the people were here, were at the school, and they didn't want, this person didn't want any, wasn't even doing much, and so that he would do antibiotics at the school. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a teacher who really didn't want to teach, so he let this happened. This is a country school up by Jarvie, and it was called Cedar Creek. Darla and Sharon went to that school, and yeah, there was a teacher. He didn't really want to teach, so he let them play anti-over all afternoon, where they threw the ball over the school, and then but they used to play. If you caught it on the other side, then you could come running around and throw it like dodgeball almost, and get those people until they're on your side. They used to play it that way. At least that's the way we played it.
The other thing I found out after the last family reunion, I don't know how many you know about it, but they used to have church Sunday school picnics in Grandpa and Grandma's yard. And so I tracked down a few people, and I found out Uncle Phil would like it because the girls would come. But he also had to work hard to get ready for the girls to come, because he had to clean up, all his siblings were gone, so he had to clean up the yard and everything, and cut the grass and prepare, because they would actually have the picnic from the Church of God would come from Estevan, also North Portal, and the other town.
Lignite.
But there was one further east on
Gainsborough.
Gatlin too. So there was 4 churches. It's a lot of girls. And so they would have potluck, they would bring lunch, just what you do at church picnics. And they had races and everything. And but the ice cream always came from the Fredericks store, because they had the store in Northgate. So they would bring the ice cream. So that was a highlight, because all the Siggelkows love ice cream. And I don't know any other, I can't remember any more things. But I checked with Vivian and Carol Fredericks, and I think they checked with some of their brothers too, and sister. And I checked, I was always going to check with Glenn, and I would forget, but I also checked with Uncle Phil, but I can't remember anything else that you guys told me. I don't know if Uncle Phil.
Well, I have a question though for Aunt Ines. Was Uncle Phil really shy?
I think so.
You think so?
I don't know, I never thought much about it.
I kind of remember some.
But Aunt Ines was probably.
I kind of remember a conversation when I was pretty young that my parents had, and they were quite concerned about Uncle Phil because you did a lot of your own studies at home, right? He wasn't in public school, and they were kind of concerned about it, him finding a way. Darla's going to read something. You want to tell us?
This,
Hold it up close.
okay. This was written by Aunt Ruth for my dad Ernie's 80th birthday. How many people were at my dad's 80th birthday? A few of us were, but for those of you that weren't there, this was written by Aunt Ruth for that event, and I will read it to you. And my brother Ernie, as I think of how our lives have intertwined, so many things come to mind. First, I with my dolls content to be, you with your skates and skis, my big brother Ernie. Remember the games we used to play, hide and seek at the close of the day, or in winter when our chores were done, and there was still time for fun. Around the kitchen table we would sit and play dominoes, checkers, and don't forget Pip. When someone was sure to cry, a corner on wheat or a corner on rye. Who's got the bear? I've got the bull. With noise and laughter the house was full, our fun family. Of course there was work and hardships too. On that farm there was plenty to do. Fields to plow, cattle to herd, barns to clean, cows to milk, and calves to wean. And through the dirty 30s we came through, when things were so bad, Dad didn't know what to do. But he heard of a place quite a distance away, where there was straw to be used as hay. No moving van came to take us that far, but 4 horses hitched to a cook car. Like the children of Israel, our travel was slow. You and John on horseback, driving the herd. To modern day people, this must sound absurd. All winter we stayed, then how happy to be back on the farm on the old prairie, our enduring family. But the dirty 30s weren't all bad, because in our hearts a joy we had. Ralph Hornby was the one who told us of God's wonderful love, how on the cross his life he gave, so that we sinners he could save. Many of us found this true and decided living for God was the thing to do. Remember when round the organ we would sit or stand, Mother would play, and we'd be the band. Louise on guitar, you, that would be my dad, you on violin, the rest of us, however we could, chime in. 100 songs in the 100, there's more than 100. I think there was 1,000, but anyway. 100 songs in the Redemption hymn book. To sing them all winter it took. Our happy family. But kids will be kids, we were no exception to that. So we played tricks and sometimes had a spat. I remember when learning a horse to ride, you said, "Come with me, sit close beside." "Please don't make him gallop," I said. "Just ride around slowly instead." No assurance you gave me that that would be true, so I threatened, "I'll cry if you do." We mounted that horse and galloped off. When over, you asked, with a bit of a scoff, "Now that didn't hurt, so why did you cry?" I said I would was my only reply. My teasing brother. I can't believe it's true, but tell me, was that really you when at dawn on a cold fall day went to harness horses and give them hay as you prepared for hauling wood? But as in that barn you stood, But as in that barn you stood, you saw a mouse struggling to get free from icy water where he didn't intend to be. You rescued him, but not in pity of his plight, but a chance to repay a trick or a fight. Poor innocent, wet and shivering mouse, by his tail escorted to the house, and I, without the slightest hunch, stood making sandwiches for your lunch, when suddenly, oh horrors, but alack, that mouse went sliding down my back. My mean brother. But then there were times too when tricks were played on you. Some with much thought, others just came. Like the time when cleaning your room just wasn't the same. That night you happened to be the last one to bed. Up the dark stairs to your room you tread. Expecting your chair to be as before, you sat with a great thump on the floor. The house shook, and then we plainly heard, "Those crazy girls" was the word. Then from our room's laughter arose, as we envisioned you in that pose, my funny brother. One more. Our lessons were learned for a future day, how to give and take and work and play. Then to Bible school you went away. That was a sad, lonesome day, but also fine, because you see, a good preacher we knew you would be. So each evening, no butter for our bread. Wonder how much they saved by not eating butter. But anyway, that was my question. So each evening, no butter for our bread. We saved for your tuition instead. My studious brother. Then you found Clara, for you a wife, for me a very good friend in life. In due time I became Aunt Ruth, and though the little ones have grown, that title I still proudly own. The fellowship and joy they brought is more than we had ever thought, and they have added more and more to this great family store. Grandnieces, grandnephews, there's no ending yet. There's some I haven't even met. Thank you, my brother. Then Jack came, the love of my life, and you pronounced us man and wife. For some years in the north, we all stayed in churches and camps. We preached and prayed. My helpful brother. When God took Clara away, it left a void in our hearts to this day. Your sorrow was great. What would you do without helper and mate? But God gave you Hilda to fill that need. A very good choice indeed. She quickly got your life back on track. We all say thank you, Hilda, for that. My sorrowing brother. Through the years you've kept in touch with visits, letters, cards, and such. When God took Jack and things weren't the same, to give support and comfort, you quickly came. Then on that gray November day when everyone was going their way, you said, "Sis, I'll stay a while and help you through. This time will be so hard for you." My loving, caring brother. Think of how dull and empty life would be if God hadn't given me you, Brother Ernie. So with thankfulness and pride and joy, I say, have a very happy 80th birthday. Your loving sis, Ruth.
I can explain the butter.
Yeah, come here.
We milk cows, got milk, ran it through the separator and got cream, and sold the cream in 5-gallon cans. You get a cream check, and that cream check usually went someplace else. In this case, it would go to Ernie for his Bible school. And so if we didn't use much butter, it meant more in the cream check and more to send away.
Tell us, Uncle Phil, about Grandpa's ledger with Grandpa and God type of thing.
Yeah. Actually, I was looking at a couple of his account books this week that I still have, and he had a grade 4 education, and maybe couldn't spell, but he was very good with figures, and he tracked his funds. Like, I remember 5 cents Northgate Sunday School, 2 cents, candy, and stuff like that. And then he has L.H. Siggelkow in the Lord's work. And there would be amounts to different places. And yeah, it's true, though there was many things on the farm that needed help and funds, but most of the cream checks went someplace else. He was faithfully supported Northern Lights missions in the north, places like that. And by the way, all of his children attended Bible college.
And they all served in different ministries from time to time. I want to just tell a memory about Grandpa when he got older. He had problems in his legs, and I'm not sure what that was, but his
Circulation.
yeah, it was the circulation. He couldn't, if he went to sleep, his legs would ache or hurt. Or Charlie, you know about that? Tell me.
I have that too, it's called restless leg syndrome.
Yeah, but I can remember him at night. He couldn't go to bed, so he would walk back and forth, and he would read books as he walked back and forth, and back and forth, all night long for hours. He'd be walking back and forth, with this restless leg syndrome, and yet he read and he read. Very interesting how in his later years he just loved to read, and he loved to, he was very generous, and he would bless, and yet he was a money, he kept track of it, right?
Yes, he did.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I remember Grandpa having those restless legs, and he'd come visit, and we'd get up in the morning, and he'd be laying over top our deep freeze with his legs hanging down, and he'd be sleeping.
Tell us some
Yeah.
more stories.
And I don't know if he had that all his life.
Yeah, no,
I don't know.
his later years.
Latter years,
Yeah, I just remember thinking, oh my.
for a lot of years.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of years. Yeah.
And every time they came, they brought us candy corn.
Ah.
Yeah, and Grandpa and Grandma were real faithful at picking us up, taking us to Trossachs camp until we could drive, and then we could
Yeah.
take ourselves.
Yeah.
So they did that, and they prayed for us, and that was this great.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, they sure did, and they loved to go to camp. Most of you probably know the story of how they were homesteading down by Fife Lake, and they had Louise. You had your mom. My grandma was pregnant with my dad, and they decided to go to this camp meeting they heard about. They went to Trossachs camp meeting, and got off and found out that in the midst of a bunch of holy rollers, these guys speaking in tongues, and oh man, they were not happy. In fact, there was some arguments and things went on, and they would have left probably, but the train didn't come back for 3 days, and the night before it came back, they both had an encounter with the Lord, which changed their lives and changed our lives, all the way down to this day. The power of God to change one couple has blessed thousands, really. And that's exciting. For me, that's really exciting. I did discover something else. I discovered that my grandmother was at Trossachs camp, pregnant with my dad, and 30 years later, my mother was at Trossachs camp, pregnant with me. I was reading the Trossachs camp book, and it talked about Ernie and Clara praying through the night for a lady that wanted to be filled with the Holy Spirit. And it was in the summer of 1947, and so she was obviously pregnant with me. We're Trossachs people. Anyway, I think that's it. You want to hear a couple more stories, or is that enough stories? Yeah.
I'd like to hear a story about Uncle Dave about something crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Uncle Dave. Oh, Uncle Dave,
Go for it, Paul.
I was doing children's meetings and in Weyburn, and Uncle Dave came over to see me, and he said, "Oh, I'm climbing this tower. You want to climb this tower with me?" And it was out of town. It wasn't a high tower, but it was. It had to do with they were catching. Signals from the States. It was early cable TV, is what it was. They were catching signals from the States and putting it into cable in the Weyburn area. Anyway, so I said, sure. So we climbed up, I don't think it was that high, probably 50, 60 feet, and there was an antenna strapped there, and the owner of this thing, the guy was down below, and he said to Uncle Dave, go up and just move that antenna over. It's crooked. You need to move it over. So he and I climbed up there, and we found out there was a metal bar here, and this thing was clamped on. We had to undo that clamp and move it over, and undo the other clamp and move it over. So we started undoing the clamps there, and the owner down at the bottom says, "Yep, that's right. That's where I want it." Uncle Dave looks at me, says, "Tighten it up." He never moved it at all. We just started this. Okay, he's happy. Tighten it back up, and we climbed down the tower. Uncle Dave. Anybody else want to tell Uncle Dave's story?
What is that story that he was leaning against the wind?
Oh, I can tell that story. This was a story. Alan Buchanan was our pastor till he passed away with cancer a few years ago. But Alan worked for Uncle Dave, and he just had hired on with Uncle Dave out in Lethbridge, and it was one of the first towers he climbed, and they were painting it, and he was working and he said the wind was so strong it kept blowing his hard hat off. So Alan said he was inside the tower, and he taped his helmet there. He just forgot about it, and he kept painting, and Uncle Dave would go up and tape gallons of paint every so often, so as they got down to it, they didn't have to go down and bring it up. He had a big sack, and he'd bring up these, and he'd tape them in. Anyway, Alan was painting away, and he was finished, and he's inside the tower, and his hard hat's taped over there. So he leans into the wind. In Lethbridge, there's a wind every now and again. He leans into the wind inside the tower and starts untaping his helmet, and he realizes the wind is holding him there, just like that. He's just leaning in, and the wind's just so constant, just holding him there as he untapes. And, oh, yeah, that's great. And then Uncle Dave comes down the outside of the tower, and Alan says, "Look at this, Dave," and he leans in. If the wind had gusted, he would just grab onto the tower. He was inside the tower. Uncle Dave's down the outside. He says, "Oh, let's go to the tower," and leans on the wind. Alan said, when I got down, I reamed him out. I said, if the wind would have gusted and you would have fallen, they would have had to come up and cut my hands off. I would have never gone down. Another story that Alan had was, Uncle Dave had this little airplane, a little Taylorcraft actually. I flew with him the first time I ever flew with him. A little plane, and I loved it. Aunt Una said to me, "How did you handle it?" I said, "Oh, I loved it." She said, "Oh, it makes me sick." She hadn't hit the fly, but anyway, he had this little, and he overloaded it too much stuff in it. And Uncle Dave, in Burdett, he had it out behind the house up by the school. He would turn around up by the school with it, and he would come running down and take off. And I was there one time. He went ride, and as we're coming down to take off, I noticed there's a power pole here and a power pole there, and I go, and we were heading right for the wire between the power pole, and he says, "Don't worry, I buried it," without any permission from the power company. He had buried the power line and put it under there so he could take off in his plane. That's about where the church is now in Burdett. He used to come down that and take off. But one day he was taking off with Alan, and he had all this stuff on it, he had it overloaded. And he's coming down there, and the thing flipped over. And Aunt Eunice saw that happen from their house. And Uncle Dave, I don't know if you girls remember this, but he never seemed to have any new batteries. He always had battery on the battery charger. And he had the car with a battery charger on there, and Aunt Eunice saw the plane flip over. She hopped in the car, and Alan said, I remember her, she was coming across the field there, and the battery charger was still under the hood was going like this, and the cables were all, the electric cord dragging out there, and she's coming roaring over because here, he just turned this plane over, and Alan said, we unhooked and we got up, neither of us are hurt. And he said they called John, and John came with a trailer, and they flipped the plane on the trailer, and they took it off to Quonset someplace, and they repaired it, which is, I'm sure this is really according to the aviation rules. But Alan said it was so interesting. One of the struts, it was a hollow strut, came down, had been bent, or it was dinged in somehow. And he said what Uncle Dave did was he drilled and he put in an air where you could blow air into there, and air pressure inside, and then they heated it up. And as they heated it, Uncle John and him, as they heated it up, it got hot enough that it popped back out again, which I'm sure the aviation guys would be really happy to hear about that. There were a number of things that Uncle Dave did, and he lived to tell the story. I loved flying with him, and Cliff would say, a lot of guys will crash. Dave, they said flew by the seat of his pants, but he was careful. He did good. He did strange things sometimes, though. He was so unique. He was fantastic. You guys need to be proud of your dad. They were all very, very neat people. I had one other story about Uncle Dave. What was it? Want to make a comment before we?
He loves to take people up.
Yes.
The first time you go up with him, he gets you up there, flying, kind of level, and says, oh, go ahead, fly the plane.
The first time he took me up, we went up, and then he took his hat off, put it on the dash, and then he dove, and the hat just came up and sat in midair. That was neat. Really
And your
cool.
stomach sat in midair.
Now, back to what Uncle Phil was saying. Alan told us, he said, he was living, he grew up south of Weyburn, what's the name? Good. No, north of there. Anyway, he was from down there. And Uncle Dave hired him to go with him up to Lethbridge. So they're flying, they take off from Weyburn or wherever, and they're flying, and Uncle Dave says, here's what you do, here you fly, okay? So they're heading out to Burdett, they're flying west, and so Alan, he had never flown before, and he's in there, oh, okay, he's flying along, and he looks over, Uncle Dave's sound asleep. So he says, I just kept flying, he said, I just followed the road, he said, but then the road ran out, and then I followed the fence, and then when the fence ran out, I didn't know what else I was going to do, and they were over the Cypress Hills, and it started getting a little bouncy, and Uncle Dave wakes up and says, oh yeah, here's we are, he knew exactly where they were, and he took off, took them home. He loved I had one other story now.
But one time,
Yeah.
one time he
You can
was
tell your own
flying
stories.
with somebody, I don't know who, and he fell asleep.
Yeah.
And when he woke up, they were close to the army
They were over the US border.
They were over the US border.
I think
They
so.
were by the air base, but
Yeah.
I thought it was
And
the
one time they
medicine
were
hats.
over the air base.
The
Yeah,
air
oh, yeah,
base
okay.
shot
Yeah.
down.
Oh,
and
okay.
He said, we gotta get out of here, we're gonna get shot down. I don't know who he was flying with, but somebody told that story.
Sharon, I don't know, Sharon is up to telling this story night about the time when you and Ron were coming to Eston for.
Oh, I can tell that story.
Graduation,
I
yeah.
can tell that. Oh, I know the other story I was gonna tell.
Yeah.
I was out at veteran camp and Uncle Dave came out to see me and he goes to land, but he didn't realize that the field was all wet. And he came down in the field and bang, he upended it. But Sharon and Ron were coming to Bible school here for graduation, I think it was the conference, and they were just east of here coming down the road, and they look, and here's this guy and this woman out there, and they're just standing by the road, and they were going to go by and look. Hey, that's Uncle Dave and Aunt Eunice. They had landed the plane for some reason in the field, I forget why, and had walked over the road, and Sharon and Ron picked them up and brought them to Eston. Hey, that's my uncle. Oh, I know that story I was going to tell. I mentioned this before. Uncle Dave was doing some classes at community college or something, Lethbridge. I forget. It was it had to do with electronics and everything. And he'd bring his stuff in there and do it and work on it in the college. And he'd go and do it at nighttime. And he made friends with the cleaning lady. And she'd see him at the door and she'd let him in. And so one night he comes there and he sees her cleaning and he's knocking on the door and she goes, no, don't let him in. And he's going, but she'd always let him in. No. And then all of a sudden he realized he put his toupee on. So he lifted his toupee up and she sees him, so, oh yeah, you. You girls could tell us a toupee story or two, right?
Yeah, he used to come to our basketball games to watch, and I don't know, sometimes he'd come, show up without the wig, and then later on you see him with the wig. We were so embarrassed.
At the middle of the game, he'd grab the wig out of his pocket and put it on his head backwards. Mom was so embarrassed, and he said if he had hair, people would respect him more.
Well,
yeah.
if we want to talk about hair, just look at any of the pictures of Uncle John. He had hair, but it was always like this. My dad, I remember one time saying, John had such nice hair, and he never took care of it because my dad didn't have. In fact, my dad lost all the hair on his whole body. He was totally. But there was a reason for that.
I got another one,
Yeah.
if anybody's interested.
Stand
Yes.
up, Pauline.
He wants me. Glenn wants me to tell about my mom. My dad wasn't a Christian, but my mom had learned Christianity, and when we were kids, she would make us go to Sunday school and church no matter what. And so we walked because she didn't drive, and I can remember walking through snowbanks, freezing my legs because the snow was so deep, but we had to go to church.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
she was pretty persistent in that. Sometimes we were lucky Dad would give us a ride, drop us off. And the other thing, my mom, I don't know when she started this, but you guys with kids, she would tell us almost every day, when you're done high school, you are going to Bible school. And all four of us went. We didn't ask any questions. When high school was done, we went to Bible school. And then we went on with whatever else we were going to do. But she would tell us all the time, go to Bible school, go to Bible school, go to Bible school. So there, how you can influence your kids.
Very much so. Very much so. My dad actually went to 4 different Bible schools in that training time, and your mom went to
Quite a few.
2 or 3. Aunt Ruth, I think, went. Did Aunt Ruth go to So Aunt Mary went to this Bible school. Uncle Dave and your mom, I think, went to Saskatoon. And they went to one in Tribune.
Ruth went there.
Ruth, yeah, that's right. Ruth went to the Tribune school. I've got a picture of her there.
Didn't Dad do some teaching at Tribune too?
Yeah, Dad taught.
They lived in
Yeah,
Carlisle.
yeah. Dad taught at that school. He was pastoring in Carlisle. They were very, very involved in things of the Lord. The story of going north. They went up and were up there for I'm not sure how long. Glenn used to go and put all of whatever it was, animals or whatever, out, and he'd go preach to them. And he'd go in the church because they lived in the basement of that one church. We'd only visited one time up there. My dad, in 1950, 49, Christmas 49, we arrived in northern Alberta, about 100 kilometers north of Edmonton. And my dad pastored up there for 7-8 years. And that time, Uncle Jack and Aunt Ruth came up there. Oh, I'll tell you Uncle Jack's story. Uncle Jack and Aunt Ruth started the church in Athabasca while we were living. It was only maybe about 40 minutes, maybe to an hour away from where they were. Uncle Jack's story. Uncle Jack went way up north with a fellow by the name of Glenn Groves, and they worked on teaching school. Uncle Phil, you might have to help me with this if you remember. They were teaching school. I'm not sure it was on reserves or just a way back in the. And I think they, if I'm not mistaken, one was on one side of a lake and the other lake, and they would walk back and forth. But one time, one of them came to visit the other one, and they were getting their meal ready, and they were looking at this new rifle that one of them had. But what they'd done was they'd set a can of beans on the stove, but they hadn't opened it. And as they were working on this rifle, all of a sudden, boom, and the beans just flew all over the place and scared them silly because they were checking this rifle out when the beans went off and blew all over the place. Aunt Ruth and Uncle Jack. Aunt Ruth, on her way up on a trip from Northgate up to northern Alberta to work with another couple, stopped at the Bible school in Saskatoon where Uncle Dave was. Oh, there's another Uncle Dave story. Uncle Dave was going to school, and Jack was going to school, and Aunt Ruth met Uncle Jack, and she didn't like him. He didn't appeal to her at all. But later on in the north, they were at Bible camp, and they got to know each other and fell in love and got married. Uncle Dave, when he was in Bible school, went on a 40-day fast. And his roommate, a fellow by the name of Malcolm McKenzie, told me this story. He said, Dave was on a 40-day fast, and some of the people in the Bible school were a little concerned because, you lose a lot of weight when you're going on a 40-day fast, and thought maybe that, some people wouldn't understand what was going on. But Malcolm told me, he said, Dave and I were roommates, and I've gone to bed, and Dave comes in and goes, Mac, you awake? He said, yeah, what do you want, Dave? Mac, what you got to eat? I'm going to break my fast. What you got to eat? And Mac said, I don't have anything in here. Oh, okay. And he said, Dave left. Somehow he found or bought a bag of apples and he ate it to break his fast. I don't know why he didn't die. You don't eat a sack of apples to break a fast. But he was very intense. In fact, I read in a book recently that they were quoting something that he had said, or it was mentioning Dave Siggelkow, who had fasted for 40 days back in those days. Mac told me one other story too about Uncle Dave. He said he had gone up north of Saskatoon someplace, to pick up a tractor, and Uncle Dave was along, and they were going to drive this tractor back down to, I'm not sure where they were headed, but they were coming down towards Saskatoon, and there was a huge snowstorm, and they decided the best thing they could do to get is they would drive the tractor down the railway tracks, because the railway tracks were high enough that the snow had blown off where the road was dipped, and it was all filled with these huge drifts. And he said, Max, he's driving along. He said, we're driving down the drive. Well, we stopped and asked at the place, when does the train come through? And they told him when the train came. Okay, there's no problem. We'll drive down the tracks. And Malcolm Mackenzie tells me, he said, we were driving down the tracks, and we're just going along. I'm driving along, and all of a sudden, there's this woo woo. He said, I almost had a heart attack. And then I turned around, and there's Dave. He's on the back, woo woo. He was making the sound of the train. He said, don't scare me silly. I thought the train was coming down on us. Oh, Uncle Dave, he was so much fun. Okay. Oh, you got another story? Okay.
But the grandkids never heard this.
Okay.
This last Christmas, we were in Tabor for Christmas Day, and with our son's girlfriend's family. And I really didn't want to go because these are not church people, you know. They maybe are Christian, but maybe not, probably not the way we think they should be. You know, all those crazy thoughts come through your mind. Sorry for the ones that were around Uncle Phil and Aunt Ines this morning, because I told them, because I kind of thought Uncle Phil should know. But now I feel like the grandkids should know. And so Tracy said to her dad, she's a Siggelkow. Number one, Tracy pronounced Siggelkow right. And he looked at me, he says, are you Dave Siggelkow's daughter? And I said, no, I'm his niece. And so number two, I knew he knew Siggelkow because he pronounced Siggelkow, right? Because if you don't know how to pronounce it, you know they didn't know you. But anyhow, he said, and in our day and age, because I'm at fault, is that we don't always pray for the meal that we're going to have, or thank God. He said, and his oldest son also knew Uncle Dave and worked with him in the irrigation field. And so he said, one thing I admire about him is every lunch that when we were out on a job, he would sit down, he would take his lunch, put it in his lap, and he would pray. Thank God that, you know, he was doing the meal. And so I asked Rita or Sarah afterwards this morning, I said, how long has Uncle Dave been gone? And we figured out about 30 years. Yeah. So it's 30 years. This unchurched man remembered, what he remembered about a Christian was that he sat there and he thanked God, his God, for his lunch. So it does, that's just something I got to think about. Obviously, I remember them telling us that. But yeah, so the challenges out there, there's nothing too small that you can do for God that someone will hear about it or see it, and you never know if they're going to come to God through that little thing.
Well, that's story time. Now, Wanda, come here. Come on down. You tell me the story.
Oh, okay. I am very thankful for the heritage of faith that has been passed on to us all from Louis and Amanda and all of their descendants, and how we can encourage each other in the Lord. And when my mom was reading that poem, that was his sister wrote it on to honor Ernie on his 80th birthday, and we all probably, some of us are having special birthdays, and all of our birthdays are special, but there is a special birthday coming up in about a week, and it's going to be my dad's 80th birthday. So thought we'd sing happy birthday and just have a small piece of cake. Are you ready? Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Wayne. Happy birthday to you.
It might slip, but they will want some photo ops. Okay. There you go.
Oh, let's get a picture right here.
Debbie, Casey just did. Diana wants some.
Brianna made that cake, and she's gonna cut it up into 40 pieces, 45 pieces, and we're all gonna have a piece. Okay, I think that's our evening. We are gonna have cake. Yeah, she didn't make that one. She's got cake for you. So we can go back to fellowshipping, playing games, and eat cake.